Okay, should be recording now. Awesome. So, okay, yes, as I said, this is part of the learning series, and we are going to cover the introduction on systems inquiry today, the first session of this module that we call the systems inquiry. We're going to have another session on the 19th of April, and then the case studies on the 26th of April. Okay, so this is going to be a bit of the organization of this module. And to understand a bit more of the organization of today's session, here we have, let's say, 3 parts of a more understanding the introductions and theoretical explanation, and then we're going to have a breakout room afterwards for us to practice some of the ideas that we're going to cover here. Okay, so the first part is going to be understanding what systems inquiry is and why is it important in the context of systems innovation. Then we're going to talk about systems mapping as a very, very important tool to understand about systems and understanding how we can make better questions, right? And then we're going to talk about leverage points. What are these ideas and how important they are in this context as well? So let me go back here, and I would like to understand your level of understanding of mirror board, right? It will be very important for us to practice a bit of how to use the mirror board, since we're going to be using that throughout the session. And I would like you to practice answering this question. What is your level of understanding of these topics that I just mentioned? Systems mapping, leverage points. Have you heard of that before? No? Yes? So for us to understand a bit about that, you can put your stickies on this line. If you don't know much about it, you can put closer to this emoji here. And if you already know everything about it and you're just here to review some ideas, then you can put your stickies closer to this line, okay? So if you don't know where the stickies are, you come here on the left sidebar and then you click on sticky note, right? And then you put your stickies here somewhere in this line. Where do you think your level of understanding is? And then for you to put up bigger or smaller sticky, you come to the sides, and then you can just drag the corners of the sticky to measure your understanding of these topics. Okay, so you can just put here so we can know where are you in your understanding of it. All right, just to make sure, do you have access to the board? Can you check the board now? Okay. Good. I'm going to take a few more minutes. Oh, sorry. I think we had a bit of a... Okay, I think a lot of people don't understand much of these ideas, right? That's what you're putting here. Okay. Oh, for you to add the sticky note, you can just come to the left side bar here and click on the sticky note to then add to the mirror board. Okay. Eagerly learning. Great. Pretty good understanding, general background. Okay. And we have, I believe, a lot of people there just starting to understand these ideas, right? Okay, good. So maybe we can get started. And I put these 2 questions here, or these 2 quotes here, because it's very important to understand what systems inquiry is and why is it important to ask questions before we actually jump and do something a bit more practical about the system itself, right? So here are some quotes that I think are very important to start with, and I would like you to let me know what you think about these quotes and does it resonate with you or not. So first one, stop looking for who's to blame. Instead, start asking, what is the system, right? This is from Donella Meadows, a very, very important author and scientist in this field. And this is, what do you think about this quote? Can you understand this quote? I can see some heads here. Mario, what do you think about this quote?
I think we are taught, or we have learned, to blame people. Like the journalists and the politicians really encourage us to blame people, and it's actually the system that's not in the favor. So particularly thinking about people in poverty, on benefits, that kind of thing. So yeah. So yeah, we've started doing quite a bit of systems reflect, looking at exploring the system and seeing what's going on with it for people.
Yeah, that's very good. Because then you start with this idea that you don't know what's happening, right? And you want to dig deeper into the system without actually imposing your way of understanding and perceiving what's going on, right? So asking questions allows for this humility, let's say, and you're a bit more humble looking at things that you're confronted with, right? And I think it ties very well with this second part here, the second quote, don't rush to the answers. First, challenge the questions, right? Because what you question is going to guide the answers that you're going to receive. So I wanted to just start the session with these two quotes before we actually go more into the theory of it. So yeah, maybe just what we have here about talking about systems.
Great, thank you, Yasmin. Yeah, and there's that quote we were talking about earlier on from Einstein about, you know, if you give me a challenge, then I'll spend the first 55 minutes, you know, questioning the question and then thinking about the answer to it. So it's really, yeah, trying to understand the system instead of just reacting and responding to the problems, the issues, right? Which is quite often what we do. We have something that affects us, we don't like it, we react to that, and we never actually grasp an understanding of the underlying system. And of course, all this systems change stuff is about actually looking at unpacking and exploring how that system works and how that issue emerges out of the way the system works. So we're never going to be doing systems innovation or change unless we actually go beyond that, immediately looking at who's blame and the problem and the first kind of response to that, and get to actually what's the system out of which this is emerging. So it's really going to start there, and then what is a system is the next question. And it's quite a profound concept, actually, this idea that many things in our universe can be understood as systems. Many very, very different things could be understood as systems, and there's actually a model for representing that. And a whole science, right, of systems that started almost 80 years ago or so. People have been trying to understand this way of looking at the world and understanding the world around us in terms of systems. And this is one kind of simplified representation of that, the model of a system. A system is a set of elements that are interdependent and interconnected in forming some overall organization and working together in some way to fulfill a function or a process. And that system exists within an environment, and it has some kind of a boundary, and it takes in inputs and And the elements are organized in such a way as to process those into functional outputs, but it also creates entropy or waste or dysfunctionality. And that's a model that you can understand all of the systems we're interested in changing, right? This is a health system. This is a food system. It's an education system. It's an energy system. It's a political system, so on and so forth. So quite fascinating that we have this kind of quite abstract representation, but it can really capture and help us frame what we mean when we use that word system. And understand that all of these systems have those same characteristics. They all need to take in some kind of input. Energy, resources, money, whatever it is, people, human resources, so on and so forth. And they have different elements in them that are organized. And there's a particular process. They're not randomly organized. They're organized in a particular way. You know, the digestive system in our body, very particular complex system, organized a particular way to perform a function. It gives us nutrients into our body. It also produces waste, and it exists within a broader environment and has a boundary and interrelates with other systems. That's what we're talking about when we say a system or the model of a system. And it really starts this whole systems inquiry, right? Trying to understand the world in this way through this model, through this representation. And of course, it's a very holistic view, isn't it? Like often we don't look at the world like this. Most people don't really understand the things in this way. They're more prone to look at the parts and try and understand them. And going back to what we're saying there, right? If we have a problem with our health system, we quite often look for that, where's that problem coming from? Is it the nurses? Is it the CEO? Is it this or that? And we try and fix that. But this here, we're saying, let's step back. Let's try and understand all those interrelated set of elements, or at least step back to get a kind of broader view of this whole thing and how it's functioning and so forth. So that's the model of a system.
Yeah, there's one question here. I don't understand why energy is the output.
Yeah, you could term that in different ways. I guess this is more kind of a physics way of looking at it in terms of energy and entropy, but the output here, we'll be working with this a bit later, and the output can be understood as a functional output. What do we really want from this system, right? So if this is a healthcare system, we want it to maintain our health, or at least try and fix it when we're not feeling well. That's a functional output. So I go to the hospital and, it fixes my hip or whatever. That's a functional output, and that's what we mean by energy. And then entropy is waste, dysfunctionality that comes out of it, yeah. So maybe it should have been a functional output, or yeah. So another quote from Donella Meadows: a system is a set of related components that work together in a particular environment to perform whatever functions are required to achieve the system's objective. And they perform functions, but they can also be dysfunctional, right? We often hear this word broken system when they talk about the education system in America or the health system or something. So yes, we want these systems because they deliver all the functions we want, like transportation, being able to move around, but they also produce dysfunctional outputs. When the system is not organized in the right way, not working in the right way, we can get the emergence of what we call wicked problems. So they both provide those functions, complex functions, but also dysfunctionality also.
Yeah, great. So this is just a brief understanding of what a system is. And the practice here is to understand this image. And we have two main questions that we would like you to just think about, and then trying to understand this image maybe in a different way. So the idea here is for you to use those same sticky notes that you can find here on the left-hand side. And first of all, identify what are some of the elements that you can see in this image, right? So for example, here you have a tree. So you can put the sticky note on this image, right? And then you can type what are some of the elements that you can actually see here. So for example, this tree, or maybe a car, and we're going to give you some a few seconds just to identify some of these elements here. All right. Yeah. Human, wheels, river, bridge. Very good. Building material. Bench, transportation. Livestock, very good. Good. Okay, so I think, regarding this quote here, right? System is a set of related components or elements. So here we have identified some of the components of this image. And a very important part of this description as well is that it's a set of related components, right? They have connections and they, in a way, interrelate with one another. So I think it's going to be very, very, busy if everyone starts to put connections here, but I think it would be good to hear from you. How do you think some of these elements are related? So for example, how is this human here related to the car? What is there any correlation here or any relations that you can see? So maybe one of you would like to unmute yourselves and identify some of the relations and connections that you have here that you can see. Okay, we have Mario, air quality, impacts. Would you like to unmute yourself to just complete this sentence?
In terms of the system, obviously the pollutants from the vehicle affects the individual and their health potentially.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. We have David.
Yeah, then we have the trees cleaning the air, which humans breathe.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's quite interesting because they're relationships, but they're different quality of relationships, aren't they? One's kind of what we may call a negative synergy, and the other one's a positive synergy, isn't it? Those things are, you said, a set of interrelated elements. Well, sometimes they're working together to perform an overall function. Sometimes they're working against each other, aren't they? Like noise pollution is an example I often give, right? That's damaging for human beings, right? When these cars go by and so forth. That's a negative synergy. But you said around the trees, sucking up this CO2, that's potentially a positive synergy. Yep.
Great. Pedro?
Through air, actually, and water, we have enormous consequences and connections. Obviously, the trees are connected to the air, the production of oxygen, the take-up of CO2, cars' production of CO2 and other toxins. Water, again, the things were washed down. And then the health of the city actually is very much dependent at the core from the air and water quality that is maintained. Everything, the indoor air, the indoor quality of life and so on, the amount of light coming into the city. So all those physical components, I think, are very, very important, connecting all those elements.
Very good, Pedro. Thank you. We have here on the chat as well, bus stop, passengers are part of the transport system, right? They're very much interrelated. David?
Yeah, from everything that we've just heard, it's really important to keep an eye on the dynamics of that system, right? Because the city itself is a dynamic system. And for example, air pollution was mentioned. So if there is too much air pollution, obviously that dynamic is skewed or tilted towards like the more negative side. So it's really important to keep that balance within that system dynamics.
Maybe I could just pick up on that before Anya speaks. There's some interesting ones here, right? We've got 4 different stickies here. Let's take these: transport, emissions, trains, and mobility. Which one of those is actually an element in a system? Only one of those is actually really an element in a system. David, which one do you think?
The train is an element.
Okay, so which one is the system of those four?
Transportational mobility.
Okay, great. And what is emissions?
It's entropy.
It's a relationship, actually, isn't it? Because what is pollution to us is not necessarily, you know, pollution to a planet or to a star or something, right? So actually, it's more of a relationship in a way. And what's mobility? This is interesting. What's mobility? That's not an element in a system.
Process. That could be an outcome.
It's the function, isn't it? That's we want our transport system to have these elements like trains so that we can get mobility. Mobility is a function of the transport system. Anya?
Looking at all of the elements, so a lot of them are also designed by people. So then that's kind of also a system, like the behavior and consumption and the needs of people drive the market demand, which is kind of a response then to what is produced and the resources. Yeah.
Good. Rama?
Yeah, I'm seeing people doing different things. What they do interact with the city, like whether they are at work most of the time, whether they are engaging in leisure activities, or is it so different areas of a city are demarcated for different things, and that interaction is what I am able to see.
Yeah, so this is actually a complex system, isn't it? Because it's not one system. A city is a system of systems. There's all these interacting systems, and it's very complex.
Yeah. Pedro?
Yeah, I wanted to emphasize that the elements air and water and light and so on, they are also components. They are physical entities, they're real. And they become incorporated, and I agree, pollution would be the result of the function or the process. Well, the bus is one of the components, or the cars are the components, and the people are the components. But so are the physical, natural components of our planet. And I find that we always sort of tend to forget about them, but they are the ones who really linked us to the surroundings, those components.
Yes. Yeah, it's very good point, Pedro. Yeah, we have here in the chat as well. This nicely displays a social system, industrial system, and ecological system, and how they're all interrelated, right? So this is, you know, one of the main ideas that we wanted to put here is that how are these elements related, right? And how we can find different relationships between elements if we bring our own perspective to looking at this image here, for example, or looking at systems in general. So this is what I wanted to, in a way, highlight here, that at the end of the day, that interrelationship is a very, very important part of an actual system. And yeah, just to understand here that these questions and these ways of looking at these relationships are a very important way to guide the exploration of the system itself. So is this idea that is not the answer that enlightens, but the questions that we ask. So I put here an extra resource if you want to read that. Thought it was very interesting one on how, you know, not just in external systems like the transportation systems or things like that, they're very important, but to, you know, our lives as well, since, you know, we are very complex systems. So if you want to explore that in this idea as well, will be very important. Yeah. So yeah, now we can, you know, well, I don't know, do you have any questions or comments. We have here, where does mobility fit into that first system you showed, probably? Would you like to
into this one here? So if we talk about mobility here, right, the elements are, you know, things like the station, the cars, the gas stations, so on and so forth. Those are the elements. They're obviously interrelated, organized in a particular way. You know, the roads are in a particular place, not somewhere else. There are inputs to the system, so urban transport system. Obviously, it's consuming fuel. You got to manufacture these cars, a lot of money, so on and so forth. There is, when we talk about an urban mobility system, we could say the boundary is something like the boundary of that city. Mobility then is the functional output, right? That's what we want, right? We don't necessarily want all these cars, we don't want all these roads, we want to get from A to B, and that's the functional output of the system. And then of course entropy is things like noise pollution, it's like all those emissions, so it's all those scrapped cars at the end of the day we're going to throw away, so on and so forth. And of course it exists in an environment which is that broader city, but you know, the whole planet and the whole universe ultimately. Yeah.
Great. And I think it answers Bodhi's question here in the chat, so we can move on to mapping. What is systems mapping?
Yeah, so yeah, I like to start that with actually looking at this, right? Sometimes people forget systems mapping is when we kind of look inside this. As we said, this is a very general model, and it's great for giving us that bigger picture and contextualizing what we're doing as a system. But then only gets us so far looking at the very bigger picture like that. We systems inquiry is ultimately about not just stepping back and looking at the whole, but also kind of engaging with the system and asking, how does the system really work, right? What are these elements here really, and how are they actually interrelated? And that's where systems mapping comes in. We can see it here, right? We want to know, what are those elements and how are they organized? So let's do a little bit of research into that and let's kind of map it out, right? That's what we're talking about. We say systems mapping. And it's a good way of engaging with the system, getting more detail and understanding how it's organized and interrelated, but still maintaining that overall view, because we can step back from the map and we can see that bigger picture. Also, quite often our inquiries actually end up a bit like this, right? A whole pile of information, these research papers or these research and analysis papers from energy companies or research centers that are hundreds of pages long and endless details of endless graphs and endless information that we get bogged down in. We can't actually see the bigger picture. So we kind of get lost then. We have this thing of analysis paralysis, people call it, when we overanalyze something. And then we get so stuck, we can't really do anything because there's just all this information. We don't see the bigger picture. But if we have something like this, we can get some of that detail, but we can also get the bigger picture. And that can help us then actually take collective action, act on that level of the bigger picture instead of just getting too caught up in those details. So this is a graphic we shared recently that was quite popular. I believe, did we in the past sessions cover the elephant, Yasmin? Do you remember? I think we did, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, okay, so we talked about the elephant, and you may know this. It's the parable of the blind man and the elephant, and how a group of men come across an elephant in the forest and they bump into it. So they don't know what they're dealing with. So they all pull on a different part and they think they don't actually understand that this is all part of a bigger system, the elephant. And that's quite often, well, that's quite often what we get when we do this sort of analysis, right? We all get kind of details of the parts and we all see our part, but we don't actually see that bigger elephant. So if we don't see the elephant, we don't understand how it functions or how it works. And we're inevitably only going to do partial changes and they may not be successful in the end. So the idea is systems mapping can give us this bigger shared understanding of this complex system to some extent, from which we can then, well, this is a form of platform from which we can go and work together and make systems level changes. And that's the hope of systems mapping, that if we do this together, we can hopefully get that broader representation. And this is one of my favorite ones here. It's the industrial cup of tea, how to make it. You can see the little gentleman or lady here making her cup of tea. And behind that, as is the case for many systems, is something of incredible complexity that's difficult for us to approach right? We often get overwhelmed by all of this. And we aren't then able to kind of engage with this system. We aren't able to learn about it. We aren't able to comprehend it. And we definitely aren't able to change it or work together because it's too complex for us. But the idea of systems mapping is that maybe we can get these representations that at least help us kind of approach it and think about it and start to think about how things are interrelated, so we can start to really start to engage with it in some way and start to think about how we might work together. Any thoughts on this little map? Anybody want to share anything? Have you seen this one before? Do you see the inputs here, as we talked about, and the outputs over here? So this is a system. What's the function of this system?
Quenching thirst.
Yeah, might be a little bit more than that, because tea is also, yeah, it quenches your thirst, but does more than that also. It's kind of enjoyable and so forth. But yeah, making a cup of tea is the function of this entire complex system, isn't it? What's the entropy here? What's the dysfunctional outcome? We can see it over here, right? Plastic waste. Yeah, all the waste. Yep. Sewage and landfill, and this tea bag's going to waste, isn't it? So on and so forth. And the inputs?
Forests.
Water, oil, so on and so forth. And then we can see all the interrelated elements, right? And this is just a fraction of them. I was thinking about it afterwards. I haven't got all the economics. I haven't got a lot of the economics in here. I mean, who's picking this tea? And how much do they get paid? And do they have insurance? And so on and so forth. Yeah, Frederick, do you want to add to this? You're on mute. You're on mute, Frederick.
Sorry. Yeah, I think you went there, but I was thinking the way we describe this system is extremely how to say self-centered, because if you look at it from another place, the system is about a lot of people being paid and having livelihood, and I mean, it can be taken from different places, and it would it would look slightly different, probably.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very complex system. There are many different actors in here with many different motives, right? Most of them don't care about this lady's cup of tea. Most of them are there because they want to get paid for picking the tea. They want to, you know, so on and so forth, sell their products. They want to, sell their oil, their chemical processes, so on and so forth. So interesting that all the different stakeholders behind this, all their different motives and so on and so forth. It's a good point. And that they're probably pulling in different directions, aren't they? Some of them want this person to get a good cup of tea. Others don't really care. Some want this, some want that, so on and so forth. Anybody else want to add to this? It's a system of systems of systems. Okay, there we go. Okay. Okay, let's, and I mean, that's the point, right? We talk about them as elements here. We talked about, you know, agriculture here as an element, but of course, agriculture is a system. And even within that, as you say, is a system, you know, the soil within the agriculture is a system in itself, so on and so forth. So there's different levels of analysis, different scales of complexity, so on and so forth. Okay, we stay going to look at some more. So that was a relatively simple one. And this is quite a stylized one of a food system, right? Just putting out those really high level points. What are the main elements, the main actors in this system, this food system, from the farmers who are going to be quite central, the consumers are quite central, and the retailers are obviously, but then there's a whole pile around that, certifiers of organic food, the technology, people are selling tractors here, the food processors, people who work for those food processors, the health industry, obviously the media, people are financing all of this, retail, soil, climate, so on and so forth. So very simplified one there. These are getting a bit more complex. So this one's an analysis of the pandemic, and it's a systems dynamics map. Won't go into all the details of all the pluses and minuses and feedback loops, but you can see there's, I think, 5 or 6 different dimensions here, 5 dimensions. to understanding the dynamics around the pandemic. On the bottom right there is around social factors, particularly government, people's relationship to the government, but also their psychology around panic and fear and what's driving that. We've got crime and violence, and trust in communities, trust in government, so on and so forth. And all of that's interrelated to other factors, right? Mental well-being down here, non-infected population. This here is getting into the health of it, who's getting infected. More people get affected, maybe there's less to be who can become infected. How does that affect other things? Up here's the economic factors. How's it affecting GDP? So on and so forth, right? There's quite a bit there already, even though, again, that's the simplified representation. So hopefully you're seeing, this kind of principle of holism. Even though that's incredibly complex, what's going on there, we're getting a nice kind of overview to some extent. It might take us half an hour to work through this, but it gives us a good idea of kind of what's going on. So that's part of why we're using this and so forth. So here's another very complex one. I believe this one is about, so this is about, trying to remember, I think this is about raising children. Yes, and all the complex factors involved in trying to raise a child. Yeah, there we go. There's a couple of weeks, work for you to dig into that and explore all of that. But it's the complexity of the different dimensions involved in raising children, from family to support, health, obviously education, community and early childhood experience. What do we have down here? Health and development on track, so on and so forth. High quality children care and early education. That's that one. And this one's actually about obesity I believe this one's in the UK. So again, mapping out all the factors. You can see here, they posted up the colors for the different categories, the colors according to the different categories of elements. So things around, the influence from the media and marketing, advertising, social factors, psychology, medical, food, and so forth. And then they have the interrelationships up here of how those things are affecting each other to ultimately affect obesity in the UK. Why are children, this is an issue here in the UK, in the United States, Mexico, China, so on and so forth. Why are we seeing increasing levels of obesity? You might say it's related to, food and fast food, but it's related to many other things. You can see here psychological factors, stress, food literacy. Do these children even understand what good food is or don't? Self-esteem, individualism, use of medicine, so on and so forth. Degree of physical education, the environment they're in. So that's the complexity of an issue like obesity. Amazing. You can see why people want simple solutions, can't you? Imagine having to work through all of this.
Yeah, not easy, and definitely a lot of effort, right, behind it. A lot of perspectives, and a lot of knowledge to put there, right? So I think in a way you could understand a bit of why it's important to do systems mapping, and here we've just highlighted some of the ideas that we've discussed already, but the importance of having a holistic view to the challenge that we're facing, right? This idea of the obesity. It's not just about the fast food and the lack of exercise. There's a lot of things going on for that to be a social challenge, right? So it's important, systems mapping in this context, important to have this, to bring this holistic view to life, to the surface. Analyzing the structure, the linkages and connections between elements and how they are maybe reinforcing each other, or creating this negative feedback. Some of you shared this idea of the perspectives, right? you create this shared understanding of the challenge, and you don't just put your perspective to it, but you bring a lot more subjective understanding of the challenge to the table. And this last part here, the course of action, shared understanding reveals points of intervention and consensus on action. So this is going to be the next part that we're going to touch upon here, the importance of leverage points. But before that, do you have any comments or questions, maybe quickly, before we move on? Anything that you'd like to share on that? We see here, Rama, throughout these systems, there is an interconnectedness possible through knowledge transfer. Exactly, right? You create this collective intelligence by creating these maps. It's not just your understanding of it, it's a shared, as you say, knowledge transfer experience as well, right?
Well, it's an incredibly powerful thing, a map. You know, it shapes our conception of reality. When you come to a city you've never been to, you have no idea what's there, and you don't know in your mind. You don't have a model in your mind, and someone shows you a map, and then that's a model of the wealth that you're now living in as you visit for the next week, and it guides you, and it determines your actions and what you do and what you don't do, and so on and so forth. So when you change the map, people's representation of reality of the world, the model, you can change so many different things.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, to move on to the next theoretical, let's say, session now. We're going to bring this idea of leverage points and the importance of points of intervention when it comes to understanding a map. So, yeah, would you like to say something about that? Oh, okay, yeah, just put some ideas here for the people that don't have English as their first language. Sometimes leverage can be a very complicated word to understand. So I just put here for you to understand what is leverage, well, a lever, right? And what is the importance of talking about lever when it comes to influencing or creating some type of change in the other part of this lever, right? So yeah, I won't go too much into it because we passed a bit of time, so we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, I think it was Archimedes a few thousand years ago who said, give me a lever long enough and I can move the world. So it gets the idea that the longer this lever, the higher the leverage you can have, and that maybe if you had a long enough lever, you could move anything, any system as complicated and as difficult and as challenging as those systems we saw before. So great, but what is that lever? How do we find, you know, this lever long enough to move these systems, and what's right at the end of that lever? How do we find these places to intervene in a complex system that might enable us to shift that dynamic? Because we're in the business of systems innovation here. So it's not just understanding this system, it's also about how can we influence it and change it. Really key question for anyone, any organization, any individual who wants to change the system is not just how do I understand this, but where do I intervene? Where do we apply our resources? And how can we have the highest leverage to actually change the system? So Vanilla Meadows, again, was thinking of that. And she came up, well, she wrote this little paper here, Places to Intervene in the System. And tried to identify some of these places, and she laid these out, and you can understand them by looking at the iceberg model. We touched upon this before. So the iceberg model is a different, I would say, the different levels of abstraction to a system. So as we get higher up, we're looking at the more concrete, specific phenomena, outcomes to that system. It's the stuff above the water that we can see, the ice we can see of the iceberg. And as we go down, it's below the water level, so we can't really see it. It's more abstract, intangible stuff. The patterns, the systemic structures, the ways things are interrelated, the way information flows, and ultimately kind of the mental models as to how people are looking at this system, which kind of does belong down there below the water level. Because if you think about it, you go into a city again, you're not going to see these mental models. You're not really going to see these systemic structures, right? That's the flow of money. That's the flow of information. You won't really see these things. You will see the buildings, and you will see some trees, and you will see, this and that. And those are the outcomes, the stuff above the water level. And she's saying that if you actually want to change the system, you need to go down to the bottom of the iceberg and be changing mental models, changing these systemic structures, right? You're not going to change a system just by moving the kind of parts around, right? If we move a few buildings around the city, move a park here or there, or put some new trees, that's actually not going to change the system. But if you've got people thinking differently about understanding their space and, how they come together and what a community means, and even structures like helping them to understand who their neighbor is, right? Information flows like that, or new ways of resources flowing within that community. Those are systemic structures that actually change that system. So that's what she's getting at here. She's saying down here, the low leverage points are the places where it's what we're normally doing in management when we have a problem. We're trying to change some quantity, some variable, inputting more money into the system, or reducing this or increasing that, whatever it is, directly influencing the system. But she's saying that's just going to affect things in kind of a cause and effect way. You're going to get a linear outcome. It's not going to be a non-linear transformational change. And as you go further up here, you're going further down the iceberg, and you're starting to change the rules, the information flows, systemic structures, and ultimately here, the stuff around the mental models, the goals of the system. But it's a system changing what it thinks it's trying to achieve. So in education, that might be, for example, changing from, our goal is to give all these students this information and get them to pass their grades, to how can we enable students to best develop and be successful in the world? That's a totally different goal. And the system would change if that paradigm, if that mental model changed. The structures and so forth would change. So let's talk about changing goals, changing mental models, and transcending paradigms up here, which really changes systems. That's the bottom of the iceberg there. And that's what we talk about when we say leverage points.
Great. I think you understand now this idea of leverage points. Do you have any questions or comments before we move on to the breakout rooms? Anything on the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand and address that, could be good. Because now we're going to move on to the practice. Yes, Frederick. You're on mute again.
I guess it's a question. When you show all these systems earlier, and there is a very famous one about the war in Afghanistan or Iraq, I think. The question that emerged for me was, how do we get people to acquaint themselves with this? Because this is something you slowly, bit by bit, become comfortable with. I guess there is a sort of apprenticeship with the system itself. And when you want a number of people to do that, they're usually not used to it. They're used to a series of bullet points, a formula, something really simple. So how do we go about this? Is it in this session or in other sessions that we're going to explore this? The leverage point is a beginning, but I think it's not the whole story. So.
Yeah, I think you have to, initially help them understand the value of this. Maybe Anya has an answer for you, but I think the answer to a lot of things like that is about how do you take people on a journey from where they are to something different, and start with where they are and start with something simple that demonstrates the value in some sense. So I would start, not with this. I would start with something that looks like this, right? But Anya, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to say the same thing, and just relating it to the person's situation and possibly reframing a problem area that relates to their situation.
Thank you.
Great.
That's already 2 good tips. So thank you.
Yeah, I think the tips are simplicity and demonstrate the value of it quite quickly, and then take them on a journey, right? Don't end with that simplicity. Try to build up to eventually 5 years later, they're spending all their times playing around with things like this. Okay, Yasmin.
Thank you.
Great. Great, everyone. Very good questions and inputs. And yeah, thank you for participating on that so far. So now we're going to jump into the breakout rooms. And here, the idea is to play around with this idea of systems and some of the elements and components that we have here, and in the context of education, right? So here we've added this image on the center, and here I've added some sticky notes from 1 to 6 in order for you to add here on the image. So for example, in terms of understanding the education system that we have right now, right? So you should start with elements. So what are the elements that we can identify in the education system that we have at the moment? And here I've added some explanation of each one of these inputs here, so you can start. Well, I'm going to break you out into the breakout room, so you can do that very, very soon. Here's just to explain to you how this is going to work. So first you put the elements, and then you go to the relations and so on. You can just follow the numbers here. Okay, we're going to have 20 minutes for that. And we're going to have, we're 26 people. We're going to have like 3 to 4 breakout rooms. And yeah, the idea here is to start with the elements and go towards the environment, right? So you're going to be put in one room in each one of these 4 rooms, and then the number of the room represents the number of the breakout room that you should jump in, right? So once you get in, you should identify a representative for your breakout room. So it's the person who is going to bring back the ideas that you discussed during the session. Okay, so just repeating some of the ideas here, just follow these questions from 1 to 6 in this order, and identify a representative to come back to the main room in order to bring back the main outcomes and highlights from your questions or your discussion group. Okay.
Okay, great. I'll create some breakout rooms. So at 1:15, is that when we'll be back, Yasmin?
Yes, since we have a bit more. Yeah, 1:15 is good. Yeah, awesome.
Great. I'll create breakout rooms.
Okay, could everyone find their breakout rooms? Or when I think Michael has 2 devices, so I think he joined with 1 device.
We pause the recording, Yasmin?
Yeah, it's just because, do you mind doing that? Because you're the host now. Welcome back, everyone. I'm still waiting for some people to come back. I think we're all here. Okay, good. Okay, so now it's the time to just check what happened during this brief discussion, right? And I'll share my screen so we can all be on the same page. And I'll start with group one. Let me share my screen. Okay, I think you can see that. Okay, great. So we can start with group one. Who's the representative of the group one?
David, you want to go?
I knew you were going to say it. Yeah, sure.
So yeah, it's just in general, how did you find using the tool to understanding the concepts here?
The use of the tool was, yeah, it was very useful, I have to say. It was quite easy to follow along with the questions that you're asking here. Obviously, you can get really stuck on, discussing the full list of elements which the system entails. But I don't think that, for this particular exercise is not necessary. So we moved on quickly, and I think we've gotten through everything that was asked. Yeah, that's the first answer to your first question. Any further questions?
Yeah, just maybe two main topics that you discussed in your room that you think are relevant for more people to know.
Yeah, I guess what's really important to discuss is the relationships between the different key elements of that system that you're exploring. And obviously it can get really messy, but don't be afraid of that. I guess that's just part of systems thinking. It's messy, it's complex, and complex solutions, complex systems, have complex solutions to them. So better taking the time to discuss the different relationships, because as soon as they are clear, a lot of other things like levers and like leverage points actually become clearer, like entry points into the system become clearer as well.
Great. Thank you very much, David.
Pleasure.
Yeah, well done, group one. Thank you for doing that. We can move on to group two. So, who's the representative of the group two to share some ideas?
It's okay. I'll apologize on behalf of the group. So we actually didn't create the system because there is no relationship. We got engrossed in the identification of the various parts of the system, and discussions about the boundaries and the inputs and outputs. So that's for me, it was an interesting point that you can look at the system really simply, or you can try to get all the parts of the system. And in retrospect, I think we would have needed probably a good half an hour to make a system out of all of this.
Yeah. This was just a brief understanding of how this canvas work and how we could start this discussion with everyone. So next week we're going to have more time for exploring deeper some tools. But do you think that using this canvas here was good for you to understand these prompts and in a way how a system works?
The input-output, yes. The environment, yes. The delineation between functional outcomes and dysfunctional outcome was a good support for reflection. A couple of things that we didn't really know what to do with was the boundaries, and it doesn't speak to the canvas. It speaks to the way we approach that. Not quite sure. We didn't really know what to do with the boundaries. And the other thing is we wouldn't have immediately known how to create a system with options. So for instance, at some point we spoke about homeschooling. And are we creating it in the same systems, and how do we see the branching and these kinds of things when we're not speaking about the flow, but the system? That's it.
Okay.
And this was personal. Did anyone else in the group want to say anything? Stacy or?
I think it's good, Frederick. We can hear from the other groups as well.
Oh.
You have some space down below to share some overall thoughts from the others as well. So yes, thank you, Frederick, for your comments. So we can move on to group 3. A lot of stickies here. So what happened during this discussion?
So I'm the group representative. Unfortunately, not everyone was on Miro. So, but we had a really nice discussion. Raji just put out a lot of points from the UN SDG goals, and we were just like jotting down all the different elements. And it was very interesting, but we kind of got carried away with that. So we were kind of stuck on number 1 part quite long, and then realized, okay, we just have to really quickly frame things together. And Pedro mentioned some kind of interesting topics, and we were trying to go down to the essences of what are the main drivers behind education systems. And then we got to governments and social system aid and facilitate higher purpose. So to raise standards of education and face the modern realities. So that was from Raji, and Jenny and Wen were also part of the team, but then we couldn't really continue after part 3. So
yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's really easy to be carried away by, just talking about a lot of things, right? So no worries at all. So yes, thank you, Anya, very much. And thank you, group 3. And now moving on to group 4. What do we have here?
Okay, so I think I'm the representative, but I ask my colleagues to compliment me, please. But I think it was a really rich discussion, like our first approach, and I think it's really rich, was what do we mean by education? So what's our main function, the main function of the system? And this is what's so rich and gave us a lot of ideas and perspectives of each other. And then we start to identify the elements of the system. So it went like really natural. I don't know, it's really fluid. So yeah, I think we have different levels of knowledge about the methodology. So it was really good because we can complement our ideas, our knowledge. So yeah, awesome. I think it's like a really first approach. It was really, really good.
Great.
Thank you for my colleagues.
Yes, awesome. Thank you, Leonor, and thank you, everyone. Group 4 and all the groups. Well done. Thank you very much for participating. And yeah, thank you for being here in the session today. We're approaching to the end of our section. So here, I would like to just give you some resources that we used during this session. The systems inquiry guides that the link could be here. So you can access here, or you can access in the website as well under tools and then guides. Here we have the leverage point paper that Joss mentioned before. And yeah, here you have the link as well. So you can take a look. Very interesting paper to read and think about. Very, very important stuff. So those are the main resources that we used here. And feel free to drop here some resources that you think are important in the context of systems mapping, systems inquiry, and leverage points. We're more than happy to check them out. So just as a conclusion of today's session, so topics that we covered today: what is systems inquiry and why is it important to start questioning before acting in systems change, right? What are maps and why are they important? And what are leverage points and how we can identify them? So these were the main topics that we covered today. And here we have a space for you to put the 3 main takeaways that you got from today's session. If you didn't know some of these concepts, maybe you have a better understanding of them right now. So you can drop some stickies here if you had an understanding already. What were the main things that you got from this session? Maybe a review on these topics or something else completely unexpected. So yeah, feel free to just put some stickies here. All right. So just to now finish off, next steps. We have, as I mentioned, our presentation next week on systems inquiry tools, where we're going to have more time for you to discuss and have more of a practical experience on some of the topics that we covered today. So if you check here, you can find the link. So don't miss out on that. It's going to be very interesting. Yeah, the other ways that you can follow up and connect to the London Hub, you have the website, the LinkedIn page. Here you have the YouTube channel. There is a space where this recording is going to be available, and all the other recordings from past events and from past events on this learning series as well. And here you have Twitter that you can follow us there as well. So, and here's the moment of feedback, right? So just 3 main questions. Did you get a good understanding of the concepts today? Yes or no? And you can leave some comments on that as well. Just drag some stickies to this line here. Was the format of the session effective in helping you understand the content? And any ideas on how we may improve some things in our next sessions? So that's it, everyone, for today. Thank you very much for participating. It was a great session. I really liked everyone's input and everyone's comments. Was very, very good. Thank you for staying here until the end. Very good. And yes, see you all next week. And take care. Good morning, good evening, good night, good, depending on where you are. Thank you. Take care.